Addition is a new romantic comedy that tells the story of Grace, a genius mathematician who compulsively counts everything. Then she meets a hottie called Seamus and has to navigate the messiness of mental health, relationships, and figuring out who you are in the context of those things. We are delighted to have the film's director with us here today, Marcelle Lunam. And we are joined by behaviour scientists, former clinical psychologists, and someone with lived experience of the topics we are exploring, Mariane Power. They're going to help us dive deep into some of the film's core themes around mental health, relationships, and identity. I'm Sally Coleman, and this is a new series from the team at good.film. So if you'd like to see more content like this, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Marcelle, how'd you come to direct the film?
Good question. Well, I'd known Bruna for quite some time. We'd worked together a couple of decades ago, actually, when I'd just finished film school. And I had been in New Zealand trying to get together a new psychiatric facility at the kind of innovative mental health centre. And she knew that, and when I came back across, and also I had a background in animation, documentary film, live action directing, all kinds of stuff. So they'd Made Up Stories had this script for a while, like about 10 years, I think. Or, well, at that stage, not 10 years, because we developed the script for a bit. But they'd had it for a while, and there was a young writer, Becca Johnson, who they'd brought on board to do the first draft of the adaptation. So they called me and said, we've got this fantastic script we think all your skill set would be great for, and we'd like you to have a look at it. And along with the novel, see if it resonates. And I'm like, what for? Well, to direct it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Which I just hadn't kind of landed with me, it was silly. But anyway, so I went away that weekend and I was really captivated by the character. I just fell in love with Grace. I kind of understood her a bit, I think. Yeah, I just felt like I knew her. And from there, I sort of got really super inspired and wrote a treatment and did a whole bunch of kind of like a visual deck and stuff and pitched it to them, and they went, yeah, we love it. And I didn't know at the time, but apparently I was up against a few other people, which I was unaware of.
I so want to know who those people are.
So
that one.
I didn't really know about that. But anyway, that was how I came to direct the film, And then, of course, it became, we developed the script and cast it and went into filming, but that was kind of the beginning of it.
Do you remember what was in that original visual pitch you sent through?
Yeah, there were lots of things. Well, I'm a real film nerd and film junkie, and there were a lot of things about, that I had seen in the script, but also that I'd read in the book that I really fell in love with. So some of the things that, initially kind of sparked me didn't make it to the film, and, because things change. But I had liked that kind of humour that was in a film called Harold and Maude. There's kind of real gallows humour about it that I sort of wanted to imbue in the film. And I think some of that sensibility stayed. I really loved the opening sequence of, in fact, the whole film I love is Silver Linings Playbook. I love Silver Linings Playbook, David O. Russell. So David O. Russell's film I loved, and I liked the whole kind of energy and chaos of that film, and I loved the way they celebrated characters that were, they had mental health issues, but it wasn't, kind of down in the weeds about it all. So I had put that in it, and I loved, what else did I have in it? I had a whole bunch of stuff. It was like, essentially it was quite sexy, the whole treatment. I wanted it to be full of energy and quite sexy and bold. And I think that kind of, stayed in the film.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
You pulled that one off.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's definitely,
okay, good, yay.
Definitely very fun, bold, sexy. One thing I want to come back to, though, is you said you were working on advocating for this new psychiatric facility. How did your, experience in advocacy in that space, impact your work on the film, if at all?
Well, my brother has a chronic mental health condition, extreme, and we had navigated that as a family for many years. And post-quake, I'm from Christchurch, New Zealand, and post-quake, there were it was really under-resourced in sort of the mental health space. And so when I went back to look after my mum, who was terminally ill, was when, I started advocating to change what I thought was a really bad system and how they looked after people that were, mentally unwell, chronically mentally unwell I'm talking. So, not like Grace. I will make that distinction. And so I learned a lot when I did that, also because I had, spent decades dealing with my brother and the fallout from that and seeing how it affected the family, and the carers. It leaves a lot in its wake, it can be frustrating, it can be deeply upsetting. And so I guess all of those things gave me an inner understanding of Grace's character, and not just Grace, but how it affected her family. And so what I really wanted to do was to make sure that we showed that there was, with love and understanding and compassion, having empathy, that you can help people with their mental health issues. And that was one thing that I wanted to portray in the film. I don't know if we, managed to get that through entirely.
Nailed it.
Do you think?
Oh, well, in my opinion, yes.
Yeah.
Well, because it was a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it really informed a lot of the film, to be honest.
Were there any anxieties you had around taking on a project?
No, no, surprisingly no. No, I wasn't anxious about it. Because I felt like I knew her and I loved her. I loved the character. I really loved her. What I loved about her was she was so vivacious and sexy and kind of wild. And I think Teresa's performance of her is just spectacular. Like, you just immediately smitten, and you're like, wow, I want to know this person. She's like Quicksilver and electric and cool. And okay, she's got issues and she's working through them. But it was all that I thought, I was carried away and excited to do it, to be honest. It was exciting. I mean, you got to be excited when you're asked to do a feature film.
Yeah.
Lucky, actually.
Absolutely.
I feel very lucky.
Yeah. Mariane, you've got a lot of experience as a former clinical psychologist and also your own lived experience as well. What were your first thoughts on the film?
I'll be really honest, and I'm so excited, can I just say, to have this opportunity to hear you speak, because when I was approached about watching the film and potentially commenting on it, I was nervous. I was nervous because I was reading the comments underneath the trailer and seeing how desperately people were excited at the possibility of representation. And I think I've seen, to your point earlier about representation, I don't want to say done badly, but lacking nuance and lacking sophistication in that understanding of lived experience. And so I did come into this a little bit skeptical and curious around, were we going to see that stigmatized portrayal of something that was highly pathologized and highly labeled into one category of being human? And that's not what we saw at all. And so the minute, I think it's within the first scene, I know we're going to look at it soon, but I thought, hang on a second. When there's that flick between that high stress loading and you see Grace in the banana scene at the shops, and she's radically counting, and even for a viewer who doesn't necessarily understand what's going on, you can see that she's in a stressed state. And then all of a sudden there's a switch, and the cinematography behind that, the lighting, the cuts, and I thought, hang on, somebody knows what this is about. There's some lived experience here. There's some understanding of the complexity of the human experience through that pathological lens or not. I'm just so excited to hear what informed those choices, because I haven't seen them done in this way, in this form of representation before, in the way that they've been done. So congratulations.
That's really great to hear. Thanks so much. It's really fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I also have anxiety myself, so I know what it's like to have a panic attack. I've been there. So I think that,
Informs.
I think you can get inside of that. That was probably why it was so easy for me to get inside of Grace's head, because I know very well firsthand what it's like to have, an overwhelming anxiety attack, a panic, and be feeling everything, buzzing, and your fingers buzzing and unable to breathe and thinking you're having a heart attack, and everything like sounds are miles away from you, and macro detail focus, and all of these things are really, they're big when you have a panic attack. So that was kind of what I was trying to get at in the opening scene. I wanted to drop down immediately into her world. Like the whole film is about Grace, and she's in every scene, and it's a hard thing for, you know, Teresa did an amazing job because, you know, she's in every single scene in the film. It's quite extraordinary. And, you know, she's got like 5 kids.
Yeah,
and
as a human, she's
as
quite
a human,
exceptional.
she's an amazing person. So I wanted to kind of come straight down into that world and be with Grace, like centre frame, like this is who the story's about. Her brain is going like at lightning speed, trying to calculate how to problem solve this situation with these bananas. Like, you know, shit, I don't have 10, you know, 10's a magic number, why don't I have 10? And she's looking around. So the camera had to convey that sense of panic,
track that,
you know, which it does. And then, of course, I wanted to see what people outside of that think. And so when you see Seamus looking at her, that's not what he sees. He doesn't see this chaos.
Internal world that she's navigating.
He doesn't see this, like, crazy electric chaos that's going off. What he sees is this incredibly beautiful woman. So there's these 2 opposing things that are going on in that scene, you know.
Because I wondered also if you picked up on that switch between her internal processing of that collision of the sensory overwhelm and the, you know, I need to get out of this situation, the stress load, and then quickly snapping back into that, I would say, compensatory strategy or the masking of, oh, nothing to see here, I'm all collected.
Well, that's what she does when she, I mean, you can see, like, when she goes to take the magazine, right, you know, from him, and he asks, and he's deliberately, he's got this magazine, which is, you know, about trucks or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like,
so he clocks.
Yeah, he clocks. He knows what's going on. Yeah. And he goes, well, you sure you want this? And she's like, yeah, whatever. And it's like, he knows what's happening there. And so you realise at that moment, he has an understanding of her already. He's had some lived experience. He knows a little bit about it, you know. And Joe was very, very careful about painting his character to have that kind of understanding. When they get outside, you know, and he goes after her, and he's so casually confident, you know, on the surface. Yeah. But underneath he's not.
Hey, look out. Take it. Keep it. Least I could do for the free legal advice.
That playfulness that captured
hilarious in itself.
And beautiful.
He brings her out of that panic, you know, because she's all panicked still at that point, and, you know, racing off and dumping the magazine because she doesn't want the magazine at all. And then she goes, and it's hilarious. And then there's the irony, of course, you know, or the joke, which is, you know, here he is, he's the perfect 10, and he's walking away, and she clocks that as he's walking away. Right.
Okay, because I spotted the glitter on the numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I loved that at the outset. That caught my attention too, because oftentimes, again, going back to that, you know, is this going to be nuanced? Is this going to be one of those dark, tragic things? There is the magic in the numbers for Grace, and there is that, you know, numbers are everything to her. They're not just the suffering. There's also that magnitude of how she actually sees the world, and so that explains it. Yeah, you know, that he's the magic 10. I love that.
Well, she doesn't, but she hasn't acknowledged that yet, and it's just when he's turned away from her, you know, that she acknowledges it, or kind of, you know, she sort of, and then she starts to think, oh, you know, maybe, but then he's gone, right? And then, of course, you know, it comes in. So, yeah, it's not the kind of your average meet cute or anything like that, but I do think it's
playful.
Yeah, there's a playfulness to it, you know, and she, like you say, she loves numbers, and there's that real elegance to the way her brain works. She works the world out through numbers, you know, and the people that she is really inspired by, like Tesla, likewise inspired by numbers, so and music even, you know, so all of the music in the film was worked out that way too, like the kind of percussive, mathematical kind of music that happens a lot in the film is very indicative of the inside of her brain, you know. So.
Well, she says just after this that she really loves to flirt, but there are millions of possibilities in her stories in the head, but she doesn't necessarily get the chance to execute them in real life. And that I felt both, you know, just sadness for her, but also like, yeah, you go, girl, you had this moment, and regardless of what happens after that moment, you can see the satisfaction. You know, look at how she's walking off there and looking over her shoulder going, I did that. You know, like, chess. Yeah, what was it called? Checkmate. I got you there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of comes back to what I really loved about her character was that she's not just one thing or the other. She's kind of complex, and she is really sexy and sassy. And yes, she's going through all this stuff and dealing with things, but actually, she's pretty good at getting her man in the end. Getting what she wants.
Getting what she wants.
Yeah.
Both as a survival, I think, strategy and tactic.
Yeah.
And then also, oh gosh, I could go on.
So talk about the decision to, you're an animator is one of your many backgrounds, the animation of the numbers.
There was a lot of animation in the script. We used that, I guess, to describe, her counting rather than have Grace, verbalising it the whole time. So we see it a bit, particularly in the beginning, and I think to introduce the fact that she is, a counter, for want of a better term. So that was kind of an easy way to do it, I suppose. And I wanted them to be just kind of be on the screen and off. So that was why they were sort of glittery. I worked a lot actually with a friend of mine who's a French animator, Vinny Chodes, and we worked on the kind of style of the numbers and what, how they would occur throughout the film way before we shot the film. We did a whole bunch of work on that. Because I wanted them to be sort of subtle too, so, they're kind of there and not there.
I do want to take a step back and actually let's zoom out and talk about Grace for a second.
Yeah.
And I'd love to ask you, Marianne, if you had to put your clinical kind of mindset on for a minute, how would you describe Grace?
Yeah, I mean, I went into the movie with the assumption that we were going to see a character that was portrayed with OCD. And then clinically what I saw was actually the compulsions, but I couldn't figure out what the obsession was. And so for those of you who know what OCD is, and for those of you who don't, from a medical model, we use something called the DSM-5, and there are some other different medical categorizations, but OCD, there's the obsessive thought, and usually that's associated with something bad might happen, or people typically know you're going to catch a disease, so that's a germ style. And then there's a compulsive behaviour. So for Grace, I think it sounds like through the film the decision is that her compulsive behaviour is around numbers. So she attaches numbers to everything. So we see the compulsions at the top of the film, but it's not actually till right at the end of the film, which I thought was stunning, that she names the obsessive thought. And I don't want to name it because people might not have seen the film, but anyway, it comes. So obviously there's OCD. For me, though, what I got so excited about with Grace's character is that, yes, obviously there's OCD and there's mental health and there's anxiety and there's all sorts of different representations. I think depending on those who are watching, maybe what their own experience is, they'll see different features. I certainly wondered about, we know that there's a high overlap. OCD tends to sit alongside autism. ADHD, the prevalence is much higher. So OCD and ADHD, for example, is like 29% of the population will have both, so there's a lot of co-occurrences. And while OCD is typically seen as in that mental health category from the medical model's perspective, there's a bit of an emerging query of, well, I guess it depends on the onset, what else is going on. For me, the hallmark feature of Grace's representation that I am excited about is a profile a lot of people don't know about, which is the twice exceptional. And so twice exceptional is where you've got giftedness, and so we know Grace is a genius mathematician, genius off the charts. That's that giftedness, and that within itself is a specific neurotype that if you think about neurodivergence as a word, it's about diverting from the norm, if people say if there is one, but there is, of what is sort of neuronormative. So there's structural changes in the brain that people are born with, that they inherit, sometimes environmental, but for giftedness, a lot of it's inheritable. And so what was interesting to me in the film, watching all of these choices that were made, and that's where I thought, gosh, there's lived experience here, whether or not people have had that medical exposure to understand what labels we might categorize. You could do a whole bunch of those labels for Grace, and if she was clinically in consultation with me when I was practicing, there's differential diagnosis and there's advantages and disadvantages for that because there's different treatment protocol depending on what's presenting. But what was stunning about, from my perspective, her being represented on film was that she didn't actually really fit into any of those labels. And that was what was brilliant. She's Grace. And the same thing that is her struggle in life, which is that, it turns into that compulsion to serve that obsessive, devastatingly impactful sadness and trauma, that that compulsive is also her strength. She just sees numbers everywhere. So it's that paradox that people don't understand with that twice exceptional spiky profile, that you've got the same thing that is your extraordinary strength can also be your Achilles heel and creates such suffering. And the portrayal of that, for me, particularly for a woman, because we know of how many women are being missed in being able to seek and support, to seek and then receive support. So our women in particular in the twice exceptional community go under the radar, and there's so much unnecessary suffering. Yeah, to see her up on the big screen like that, I'm excited because it's a community I'm really passionate about. Full disclosure, I have, in addition to my clinical experience, my 2 kids are twice exceptionals. And so we've navigated both, the gifted systems, which are interesting and sort of non-existent in Australia at the moment. That's a different conversation. And unfortunately, the mental health system at quite catastrophic levels. And I can say that because both my kids are, one in particular is very open. He's rapping about his mental health at the moment. But I've seen where our insistence on a label does a lot of harm. And I think that where obviously treatment is so important, what this movie shows us is that treatment is one part of a human's experience in life. If they happen to be somebody who is born with a different type of brain and or with exposure to mental health, they've still got relationships, they've still got purpose, they've still got, we see at the end of the film her desire to go and do things in the world, and she wants to love, she wants to connect. She's just wild and magnetic and
she's got a lot of energy. I mean, I think to your point about labelling, that was kind of quite in the kind of forefront of my wanting to portray Grace as not being her diagnosis. It was really important not to have her be so categorised as to be, she has OCD or she has, anxiety. It was, we purposefully didn't go there with it because we wanted to be able to celebrate difference. It was really important to show the tolerance and empathy and compassion around, her family. Not all the time, because obviously, her sister, she has issues with her sister at a certain point. So, there's always going to be fractious moments in that journey. But it was important that we, it was a bit like fly your freak flag. It was like, it's okay to be you, Grace, and we're going to celebrate that. And it's not about, pathologizing it. That was kind of where I was coming from with it.
I agree, and I love that she actually names that in the script. And I thought Therese did a brilliant job of that, of speaking to her sister and says, well, we're all a little bit crazy sometimes, just hiding the crazy. We all do it, even you, Jill. To me, that spoke to the universal experience of actually how universal it is for us all to be hiding parts of ourselves in order to belong. This was just such a beautiful depiction of somebody's sophisticated, nuanced, and I think kind. I think Grace is actually very compassionate towards others in recognising the burden potentially at times that she's had on them. And I imagined, and maybe this is, you see things through your own lens, I wondered if perhaps there was so much internalised shame and a wishing that things were different for her too. There's some holding of that sometimes in some of the scenes that I could see. Yeah, well, there's a scene in particular I think that really comes through, in, which is the scene where she's with, she walks into the backyard where her mother's having a cigarette. It's my favourite. Yeah.
And very little is said between them.
But everything is said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you sense with Grace, that
she
knows what the effect that, she has on her mum. And all her mother wants to do is say, wants her to be okay.
I also, we were just discussing the opening scene and you talking about wanting Grace to be this character who's fun and vivacious and funny and witty and smart. And I really think about this scene in particular in contrast to a show like Monk, which you maybe are familiar with, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
There's a few shows out there that just sort of have maybe a two-dimensional portrayal of OCD where the character becomes the butt of the joke because of that particular betrayal.
Yeah.
So it's humour, but the joke's on the character, and that never seems to happen in this film. We laugh, but we're not laughing at Grace. Grace is kind of making us laugh. There's agency there. How did you manage that balance?
Well, I think that goes back to that point I was talking about before, about very clearly wanting to celebrate Grace and her difference, and also as a female director, and the whole idea about the female lens, etc. I wanted us to be compassionate toward her and to love her, really, to fall in love with her, because I love her. So I think it was a combination of things. It's in the writing because we were really cognizant of it, and I think it's also in the setup and the staging and the performance and the shooting of it. We didn't, people don't kind of comment on Grace as if she's a joke, and we don't put a lens onto that. And when we see her as being kind of either witty or funny or vulnerable, or we're not, the lens is never turned on her in a negative way. So again, that was quite, I suppose the film was imbued with that, sometimes unconsciously, but it came from that place of wanting to, just go, she's cool, I like her.
Is that why you think Seamus is attracted to Grace? What do you think attracts him to her?
Oh, well, I mean, to begin with, she's genetically blessed, so, yay
There's
that. But there's that. But, of course he's attracted to her because I think for lots of reasons, actually. She's, she's quicksilver, and she's diamond shiny, and she's curious, and she's really interested in the world. But she's also self-deprecating, and I think, he is too. He's self-deprecating, but he's also curious. He's smart. She comes from a different world to him. So she comes from money, and he doesn't, very obviously, come from that. So there are differences there. He's quite earthy, he's really into, going out into the, camping and stuff like that, whereas she's completely not. So I think there are differences with them, but I think that, he finds her initially captivating because she is full of contrasts, and I think that there's something, kind of heady about that.
How do you think romance is linked to mental health in the film? Because it is, of course, a rom-com.
Yeah, well, I mean, the opening scene, she's having a full-on anxiety attack, and he's clocking it and going, I'm in. So you're like, okay. So therefore, which is unusual for a rom-com, to kind of start from that point. And then, thereafter, she doesn't get to the first date because of her, condition, mental health issues, etc. She just can't she's so anxious that she can't do it. So, and then inadvertently, meets him in a supermarket, afterwards. It's like, oh my God, and then it's all on, right? So all of that is spurred by, her mental health, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even, when, I don't really want to get into everything about the film because then no one will want to go and see it. I don't want you to see it because, it's charming and gorgeous and you'll enjoy it. But, I think a lot of their romance is imbued with, sort of mental health, I suppose. But also, again, I think it's indicative, or their story's indicative of, a time in which we can go, okay, well, this person's got, X, Y, and Z going on, and that's okay. That's cool. I can go in there regardless, and that's all right. I think, there's a lot of bad things about social media, that's a given, but one of the great things I think about, the democratisation of speech, etc., is that there's been this fantastic platform for all kinds of different people suddenly to be okay about who they are, because you recognise there are so many other people that are like that, right?
Yeah, it's being seen, piece.
Totally. Do we have time to play our Yamcha scene? I reckon.
Can I just make a quick comment on that scene? Because I had a totally different interpretation of Seamus as a character.
Oh, did you?
And again, this speaks to, I think...
But that's
when
cool.
Exactly. And I think that this is a beautiful thing about art and about film, about movies, and why I love creativity in general. But first of all, okay, let me put a caveat. I think whenever you go and see a film, all of us are going to see it through the lens in which we experience life. So full disclosure, I am ADHD. And I wondered about Seamus's character because clinically I've also seen and this has been the case in our community, I mean, like attracts like. And I wondered with Seamus, was there a little bit of ADHD feature going on? Was that a direction or was that an intentional choice? And I'll tell you why. I spotted the clearly smart. Grace's sister says, well, Grace is not going to tolerate fools. So clearly there's something going on. He's quite intelligent there. But he's quick-witted. He joins her and there's a playfulness in that intellectual level there. He talks about having not gone to school. He talks about then defending, I didn't go to university either when he's drilled by Jill. I went to the University of Life. We see that so much in our ADHD population. He speaks about these spontaneous decisions he's made. He's a painter. He's out in nature all the time. But the one thing that I wondered is when you're in a relationship with somebody like Grace, there's something about the ADHD experience that we love to seek out a little bit of novelty, and I think she excites him and keeps him on his toes, and I think he thinks that's sexy.
Yeah, well, yeah, look, I think
So
definitely...
there you go, that was my interpretation.
I think that's... and that's completely valid, and that's the good thing, I think, about, a film, and that you can, like you say, if there's nuance in the way that you portray it, hopefully people will see something... that is completely to them, resonant to them in it. And that is good. That's great. So it wasn't it wasn't from my point of view conscious that he was ADHD, but maybe he is. And that's great. And I'm totally with you. T's super excited about the fact that she's a novelty. Yeah. I'm with you there. The first time she actually manages to get to the date, which is an achievement in itself. She's so anxious before she gets there, and then it doesn't start particularly well, because they butt heads. And she looks fabulous, and she arrives there, and it is it's super anxiety inducing. It's we found this amazing restaurant in Melbourne, and I just loved it because it was so anxiety inducing, and it was perfect. It's big, there's loads of people, it's lots of different colours and designs going on, and the whole thing about having an anxiety attack is that, noise just, these details start signal jamming, right, noise and everything. So there's tons of noise there. There's a squeaky wheel on one of the yum-cha carts, there's lots of people talking, and there's the clicking of the chopsticks, and there's all of these carts coming by and lots of food going, and everything just becomes super confusing. And so what I wanted to build up the rhythm of the scene, to start off kind of slow and normal, and just to get pacier and pacier and pacier and pacier until she just it's too much, and it's absolute cacophony, and she just takes off. Sorry, I can't. And I also wanted to get that thing where you have because Seamus is talking to her, and he's in a hall a million miles away, and she can't hear him because everything else is taking over. And even the poor guy who's offering her tea, and he's completely bamboozled. It's what did he do wrong? And she just takes off. Yeah. And to me, that was that whole, everything's just kind of building up to this crescendo. So that was how I constructed the scene, and it was right down to the handheld whip camera and everything that was going on. So you can sort of see it. It's built up with Teresa's performance, Teresa and Joe's performance, the actual location, the staging of the scene, the sounds, and the rhythm of the cart and the camera work. Yeah, so it was really designed, that scene. We didn't have much time to shoot it.
What were you wanting to get in as a...
Give me 2 seconds on this one.
Yeah. If we can keep it to a sentence, I reckon.
No. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
That yum cha scene, I was very concerned that people were going to come out and onto the comments around, you can't have sex in the middle of a panic attack. I thought, what have they done? And I thought, hang on a second, take a step back. And I was curious about this, and we may not unpack it right now, but clinically, there's also a possibility that she wasn't actually in the center of a panic attack, that she is so sophisticated in understanding that feeling of the emergence of one, that she was clocking the sound, she was clocking that distress. She's exited as a compensatory strategy in the first place, got herself outside. He's met her. And she says, here's someone who sees me, and finds that incredibly arousing. There's another interpretation. And I think what was so stunning about that is that through that female gaze, if it was switched, would we be questioning about whether or not a man would have sex? Maybe. But I don't ever want anybody to be pathologizing her choice in that moment and that intimacy that you were able to capture. I just thought it was brilliant.
Well, look, that's a great take on it. From my point of view, I think that whole scene for me is like kind of when you're in those moments, sometimes they're quite fractured, and it can feel, like a great jump from one moment to the next. And that was sort of what I was trying to visualise as well with that. It's like it might feel like she's kind of leaping from a panic attack into having sex, but it's like that's kind of sometimes how our brain can compartmentalise stuff, or for me anyway. And so it kind of made perfect sense. And also there's kind of a cinematic thing about it too. I think sometimes with film, much like with animation, you can kind of go anywhere, and you from one scene to the next, and suddenly you're in this moment. And that was why I used breath in the film as well. Like you can hear this release of her breath going, at that moment. And that is for her, it's a release of all of her stress. Yeah. It's all gone in that moment. And she's also trying to take charge, she's taking charge at the moment. It's like, I kind of like that. I thought, it's cool for women to be sexually proactive.
And tell us a bit more
with that.
about, because there is this really strong female gaze in this film. Obviously you're the director, but there's a big female collaborative team as well. Can you tell me a bit more about that process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've, firstly, Bruna and I have known each other for a long time, decades. I've worked with her since I finished film school, and she was a young producer working at Blue Moon with Dion and Anju, and, I've kind of worked with her since then, really. And, I also did like the Made Up Stories animated logo. And just about every company she's had, I've designed the logo and stuff for. The team behind it, Christina Pazan and Bruna optioned the book. Tony obviously is the author. They're all women. Becca wrote the script. Jodie Madison was also involved. Jean Snow, who was brilliant and come over from America to work on it. Predominantly the cast is women. There's two guys really in it, but they're all women. We had, Sarah Pearce is amazing. She's just one of New Zealand's most incredible actors. We're very lucky to get Sarah on board. Azara Newman is amazing as the psychiatrist/psychologist. There were a lot of women all the way through. Vanessa Chernay, the production designer, Deb Peart, who was editing the film.
And the woman that came on to consult, you were sharing earlier.
Yeah, Francesca. Francesca I had met in New Zealand when we were doing a lot of work around trying to set up a new innovative mental health facility, and she's an OCD survivor. And I immediately contacted her when I had this, first draft of the script to become a consultant on it, which she did all the way through, and she was amazing. Then there were, other clinical consultants who were women. There were lots and lots of women involved in the production of the film. And obviously, I'm a woman, so there's that. Which is good because, in an industry which it is really difficult, it's really hard to get out there, and it's hard to get a film made, let alone, be in there as a female director in a world that is predominantly male. So, I was incredibly fortunate, and I think it was that relationship that I had, specifically with Bruna for such a long time that enabled this to happen. And I got to say, film is all about relationships, really. Making a good film is about relationships, and it's about a team and having a team behind you supporting you. And I was incredibly lucky, but it also comes from a long time. It comes from a history of working together and understanding each other and knowing each other and being there for each other. It's a tough industry, film, I got to say, but I mean, I'm very, very lucky that I know, Bruna, and we knew each other since we were very young. And also one thing I will say for Made Up Stories is they do champion really bold voices, like they're really supportive of creatives, incredibly supportive. They keep going back and back time and time again to them, and they're like a family, Steve and Bruna particularly are like family to me. So I think I think that shows in the final analysis, that you have a lot of support around you, because it's, it's hard work making a film. I think I probably didn't sleep for like 6 months or more.
It reminds me of the family in some ways. They rupture and they mend.
Yeah.
You need time in relationships and film.
That's right. Yeah,
We are nearly at the end of the conversation. To wrap up, Marcelle, why should people go and see Audition in cinemas?
Because support Australian cinema, but it's a charming, feel good, really beautiful film. I think in a time where, we're living in currently, which is a bit chaotic and crazy. I think it's a film that you'll enjoy. You'll love it. It's, Teresa and Joe are amazing in it. The whole cast is, actually, to be honest. It looks beautiful. It's got a banging soundtrack, which I think you'll like too. But yeah, it's fun. It's a feel-good film. And it's a romantic movie with an unusual twist, so I just think you'll enjoy it.
I think it's a great one to take a group of friends to as well, and book the pub afterwards and just talk about it.
Yeah. Well, that's that too. And plus, of course, it would make a great date night film, I think, why not? Dive in. All of that, for sure.
Audition hits Australian cinemas on the 29th of January. It is smart, it is funny, it is such a great conversation starter, obviously. Thank you both for coming in today to dive a little bit deeper with good.film.
Thank you for having us.
Having us.